Hello and welcome back to Scale War Machines and the first video of 2024. As promised in this film, I'll be showing you how to apply scale Zimmerit to your 1/72nd scale models. I'll be doing this using the Liang Model Zimmerit applicator that I looked at in a previous review. So if you want to see how I got on, stay tuned. This is the 1/72nd scale Tiger 2 or King Tiger from Revell, and it's a kit that my nephew started many years ago. It was half built and I had various bits in an organiser tray, so I decided to finish the build. And I thought it would be a perfect opportunity to use the new Zimmerit applicator from Liang Model. This would also be the first time I'd attempted Zimmerit in this tiny scale, sometimes called Braille scale. To do this, the first thing you're going to need is Apoxie Sculpt, which is a two-part epoxy made by AVs, as well as their safety solvent, also known as their finishing solution. You'll need some carving tools or sculpting tools, and don't be disappointed if you find your Apoxie Sculpt looks a bit old. Just dig down until you get to the fresh stuff. The key here is to mix two equal parts, in this case balls of the hardener and the epoxy, and make sure they're smoothly blended with your fingers. You can then roll it out using a roller, and this was just a generic roller and a piece of glass. The roller I got on eBay. Obviously you don't want to make it so thin that it's hard to use, and you can to a certain extent roll it once it's on the model. But try and get it as thin as you can on something like a piece of glass and it should come undone. You may find something like a razor blade helps. You can apply it all over the flatter surfaces of the model. So in this how-to guide I'm starting with the easiest surfaces, ones that are flat and devoid of detail. As you can see, it's been rolled on and made as thin as possible, and I'm using this wax carving tool to smooth everything out as much as possible. Obviously as you smooth it you'll get some overspill and you can tidy that up as you go. My plan here is just to go around the whole model, especially the turret, but also, as you'll see later, the sides, and get it as flat as possible, using a variety of tools, from the wax carving tool to a razor blade and regular use of the roller. You'll also see I'm using the safety solvent or finishing solution quite regularly as well. You can also use your finger to smooth it out, and you can tidy up as you go. Here I've got it pretty smoothly applied and quite thinly applied all over the model. Part of the trick is to keep on top of it and keep the piece clean, so regularly remove all those little blobs and elements that will mess up the finish of the model. Now, a good tip is to wet the roller in the safety solution. If you're more curious about this tool, you can see it on the review. But it's fairly simple. It comes with a variety of rollers, and in this case I chose one that gave a scale appearance, and you just simply roll over the Apoxie Sculpt that you've previously applied. You can see I'm going through it and keeping it tidy, because using the roller inevitably squeezes more material to the top of the model. If you make a mistake, don't worry. One of the beauties of this technique is you can just re-roller it. You can also smooth things out if you make a mistake with the safety solution or finishing fluid, and just roller it again. So you'll see me making regular repairs as I go. There is a greasy residue with this product, so the safety solution is very good at removing it. Just a wide flat brush will do the trick. Here I am making some final tweaks with a spatula and with a scalpel. Now do remember that this was very crudely applied at the factory, so it doesn't have to be perfect. In fact, you'll see later in some references it was very roughly applied. Nevertheless, I go around trying to keep it as neat as possible. I also try and keep the weld lines and features at the top of the turret clean. Now, one of the tricks with this tool is it's got a reversible handle, and you can put a single non-rollable imprint as well. Here you can see me with the tool reversed, and I'm going around just pressing in the non-rollable imprint wherever I feel a little bit of detail is required. And you can just continue to make final touches using the non-rollable end of the tool. Now to smooth everything out, you can go over it all with a flat brush and some safety solvent. You can also add any little bits of damage, chips and so on at this stage if you so wish. The key is not to rush and just take your time. I found it useful to remove the non-roller end of the tool and just use it in my fingers as well, particularly around the front of the turret, where it was really hard to get the right shape of the pattern and also get in there to apply the Zimmerit. So I used that just with my fingers. For the rest of the hull, it's really important to work around any accessories that you're going to apply. In this case, I had a little bit of the hull that was going to show where the side skirt was removed at the rear. I made sure that that was applied, and then I moved over to the other side of the model. Luckily, we're still dealing with relatively simple parts of the process here because the hull sides are of course flat. So ideally you want to start with anything that is flat. So these big expansive flat sides of the King Tiger were perfect, and going is pretty quick when you work on these sort of areas. Again, just smooth on a layer of the Apoxie Sculpt, wet your tool, and then use the roller or the imprint end as you wish to get a realistic effect. If you've got any finer pieces, like for example here the rear mudguards, you can of course apply it to those areas if they're flat and easy to reach. I find it easy to do that off the model, and you can see here I just apply the same technique, thin layers of Apoxie Sculpt over the rear mudguard, and it does require a fair bit of reworking, but I use the imprint end of the tool and apply the Zimmerit, as well as plenty of damage. This was an area at the back of the tank that would be heavily damaged and the Zimmerit would conceivably be chipped. Just remember to use a little bit of the safety solution to smooth everything out so it appears natural and in scale. With that done, I can put that down, let it dry off a little bit. I find it helps to let it dry for a few hours and then chip away at it to show that damage that I mentioned. And here's the overall effect. You can see it's a relatively realistic in-scale effect, and it's quite easy to attach the accessories on top of it, as you'll see on the other side, and I'll cover that in a bit more detail. But the tool certainly gives a very realistic effect. You can see here that the model is half done, and that's because I want to add a bit of damage to the front glacis plate, and so I wanted to treat that as a separate section. I did a quick test fit to see how it's looking, and this product will dry in about 12 hours or so. So it's rock hard then, and I've even used it to glue things. It's a really great product, and I've done a video on it which you can check out in the description. I'll put a link and maybe a card as well. So in terms of the model, I wanted to add lots of little details. There's a lot I did off camera here, like for example the handles, the sprue weld seams, little details around the turret and so on. I'll cover those in more detail as we go along. But at this stage you may want to attach things like the side skirts. In this case I checked which bits would be revealed and which wouldn't, and I thinned down the side skirts to give them a scale appearance. This was done of course with a needle file. I could then test fit it and make sure it fitted around the Zimmerit I'd applied. At this stage as well, I made sure to use my mini drill to drill out all the lifting hooks that are a feature of the King Tiger, and also the vision periscope holes. That enabled me to have a scale realistic appearance and just required a bit of drilling and filing. You'll also notice that there's plenty of thinned putty. This is Tamiya white putty, and I like to apply this just to fill in any gaps and replicate things like mud and dust. So I thin that with acetone. Just make sure you use a mask or respirator, of course. When it comes to the finer details, you can apply it on top of the Apoxie Sculpt Zimmerit, but as you'll notice I apply things like handles, weld seams and so on. To apply the weld seams over the top of the Zimmerit, I use this Slater red sprue reference. This is a really great product that I've used for years, and it's really good at replicating weld seams. You can glue it over the Apoxie Sculpt with some Tamiya thin cement or any other kind of liquid cement. Then it was time to add some handles using some wire, both copper and other types of wire, and I use this RP Tools handle bending device. I've done a video on this in the past, and I leave a link here. And it's a very simple tool for forming and bending and shaping handles using things like thin copper wire. That enabled me to apply those where they are needed on the model, but of course I find it easier to do that before the Zimmerit is applied. It's easy on the areas where there's no Zimmerit, but you need to think ahead and think, where will the Zimmerit go, and is it easier to mark the position now and apply the handle before you apply the Zimmerit? In terms of preparing the rest of the model, I had to think about the engine grills, and I'll cover that later. And I also had a problem in that my nephew, or me, I don't know who, had misplaced quite a few bits of the kit, particularly track links. This was going to become a problem later on, and you'll see how I deal with that. But if we go back to the Zimmerit, I now wanted to tackle the side of the model that was going to have damage. This is easily done with a motor tool and something like a burr. And I just engraved where I think some shell damage or some sort of anti-tank fire or splinters had damaged on the front glasses, both in the lower half and on the top half. With that done and smoothed out with plastic glue, it's very easy just to continue. Now what I like about this technique is you can merge a piece of Zimmerit that's already dried with a new piece. So I knew I'd be able to join the Zimmerit together. I could then paste on a nice layer all around the front of the glasses and start to work out how I'm going to do it. References were essential here, but with the Zimmerit applied, scrape away any openings, smooth everything out, and of course you'll follow the same technique as the rest of the tank, but what you can also do is carve away any areas of damage. So where I'd previously engraved the model and shown some anti-tank fire, I could scrape away the wet Zimmerit and get it to show damage around the impact. Having applied the handles, I could also attack areas of the model and apply Zimmerit where I'd done that extra detailing. So for example, weld seams or copper handles. The rear turret door is a very tricky and finicky area, so the imprint tool was very useful. The machine gun cupola at the front is a really tricky area to get right, and I found the Liang Model tool really useful. With my references in hand, I could gently dab the distinctive pattern into that circular element of the tank. The pattern's way more intricate in this part, so having that imprint tool really helped. Now going back to damage, I'd marked some areas where I wanted distinctive damage, and that was easy enough to apply. Just roll it on and removed with a sharp blade. And you can also see I've used Apoxie Sculpt to show the riggers or the mounting points for the side skirts, so it really is a very versatile putty. I also used it to get around the problem I mentioned slightly earlier with missing track links. Apoxie Sculpt is so workable that I could use it to create, in effect, gap-filling track links. And given that the side skirts were going over the top, it just about worked and hid the missing elements on that side of the tracks. In the final straight now, and it's time to add all the details. Now when it comes to adding details on top, something like plastic sprue you can glue with Tamiya thin liquid cement, but some things like this conduit for the headlight you'll have to glue with super glue. That was also the case with the headlight, which I engraved to give it a better night driving slot, and I thinned down the mounting plate using needle files. That also had to be super glued on top of the Apoxie Sculpt. And just to show you how you apply the weld seams on top of Zimmerit, in this case Apoxie Sculpt Zimmerit, you can see the Slater reference there, and you can also see me cutting little strips of it to shape. It's circular in profile, and if you cut it to shape and then apply it with some liquid cement, you can then engrave it when it's wet and slightly melted by the glue to create a weld seam. I went round the rest of the model and applied little tiny weld seams to all the tool attachment points and anywhere that would conceivably be welded onto the hull. And here again I found that liquid cement did work on top of the Apoxie Sculpt, particularly for the tinier pieces. In order to recreate the engine grills, which are a feature of the back of the tank, I used a mesh that comes with the Tamiya King Tigers, and I found it worked really well at this scale. I don't think it works at 1/35th scale. I used Deluxe Materials Rocket Card Glue, which is a water-based PVA style adhesive. It was then really easy just to tack them into place. For the circular ones, I used a little bit of super glue to hold it in the centre, and then I could go around and fine-tune the shape of the circular grills, and then seal the periphery with the Rocket Card Glue. Going back to the technique I use of thinned putty, in this case there's a little bit of Tamiya white putty that's been carefully thinned and applied. I also used, as I had the acetone out, Mr.Surfacer. I've done a video on this product before, but it's a great liquid putty. It's easy to thin with something like acetone, and I applied this to anything that was cast or had been cast in the manufacturing process. I also applied it to anywhere where I needed texture, like the exhaust pipes. And in this case, this product works well to replicate rust, as well as a cast texture. And there we have it. The Zimmerit covered tank is pretty much complete. But as you'll see off camera, I applied the spare track links and a few more details here and there. The little hooks were made using pieces of card, paper card, as I found that was the easiest to bend into shape. So I'd bend it, seal it with super glue, and then I could attach the spare track links. There we have it. I'm really quite pleased with it. The Liang Model tool worked so well. It's so versatile with both a roller and an imprint tool, and of course there's various sizes for different scales. All I need to add to finish this tank off and get it ready for painting are the exhaust pipes, but you can see areas of damage there and details that sit nicely on top of the Zimmerit. So I'd strongly recommend this tool, and I'd really recommend the Apoxie Sculpt method. I found it really easy. I think the scale effect was particularly successful. You'll see under paint. I think it worked really well. And talking of paint, in the next episode I'll cover building a simple diorama base for this model and all the paint stages to create a realistic German tritonal camouflage scheme. For that I'll be using the Mission Model paints, and I look forward to showing you this in the next video. Thanks for supporting Scale War Machines, and bye.
Subscribe for our latest videos.